So good to see everyone, and welcome to Desiree, who is perhaps new this morning, and welcome to the folks on YouTube who may also be new to our Sangha when they view the talk. So our theme for the next 3 weeks is going to be preparing for the Bodhisattva Vow. His Holiness Drikung Kapgyong Chetseng Rinpoche is in the U.S., and he will be giving the vow, and it will be available online from North Carolina. And he's also will be here for Tibetan New Year, the Lunar New Year, and there'll be a special program online for that as well. But for our Sangha, I want to encourage everyone to consider formally taking the Bodhisattva Vow for several different reasons. As you remember, when we finished studying Shantideva, we invited His Eminence Tritsap Rinpoche to come online and formally give the vow. And this is an opportunity to take it with the head of our lineage, His Holiness Drikung Kapgyong Chetseng Rinpoche. And I know many of you have not had the opportunity to meet with him in person and to visit at any of the teachings he's given in the U.S. or around the world. But I wanted to start out saying a little bit about His Holiness. And you can also read about the first part of his life in the book Heart of Tibet, which is his biography up until the 90s. So His Holiness was born into an aristocratic family in Lhasa and was recognized as the Drikung Chetseng Rinpoche, or the co-head of the Drikung lineage. The Drikung lineage has always had two leaders. One was generally civic, like a governor, and one was more the spiritual teacher. And those roles rotate over time. But he was recognized at 5 years old and taken to live at a monastery and began his early training in a monastery. And his family could see that there were very troubled times ahead, and they wanted to leave Tibet and go to India, and petitioned the monastery to let His Holiness go with them, but the monastery refused. And so when he was a child, there was the occupation of Tibet by China. And as a child, there is this story that he was up on the balcony of the monastery watching the horizon every day, waiting for the Chinese occupiers to come, the soldiers to come. And they were moving through Tibet, destroying monasteries and destroying libraries, destroying artworks, essentially the old story of destroying a culture in order to re-educate a culture. So he saw the soldiers coming, and they reached the monastery and said, everybody come out. And everyone was afraid to come out, so he led everybody out as a small child. And then, because he was from an aristocratic family, he was separated, and the communist ideal was to then raise up the people who had no education and a less fortunate rebirth, and treat poorly those people who were from aristocratic families. And so he was taken care of by the older Rinpoches at that time it was Chunsan and Tritsop Rinpoche, for quite some time, and had the experience of, I'm looking out at the winter snow today. He and the Rinpoches were in like a shack the size of a tool shed with a tiny gas stove trying to heat a can of beans on a fire, and that was the kind of life they had fallen into. The monastery was closed and they were moved to the city, but had no resources whatsoever. And there were many, many difficult situations and very difficult times for all of those educated Rinpoches. And eventually he was sent to a work farm. And there was a period of famine for a long time in Tibet when the culture was disrupted. And so the life on the farm was very, very difficult. But he was on the farm for 15 or 20 years and worked hard and became very trusted. And he knew that it was time for him to take up his responsibilities for the Drikung lineage, and to do that he needed to escape to India. But if he told anyone and if anybody helped him, they would suffer along with him if he were to be caught. And so he was given, let's say, a release papers for a rest or a vacation, and he began his escape at that time. And even when he was traveling, to make sure that he wasn't caught by soldiers, he walked at night. So I'm looking outside at the snow falling, thinking of if I had to walk from here to California, going over the Presidential Mountain Range at night, not having companions, not having even good maps. It's a frightening prospect, and it's miraculous, let's say, that he was able to accomplish that first great arduous trip to India. And when he got to India, he was given a choice. You've suffered so much, you haven't seen your family in all these years. Why don't you go visit your family and really think, not only do you want to stay a monk, because he was given the kind of partial ordination that are given to children, but do you want to take up the huge responsibility of leading the Drikung lineage? So the Drikung lineage was made up of whatever refugees had escaped to India, and it was in chaos because no one felt that they had the authority to organize, that it was only the two heads that had the authority to organize. So he did go to visit his family, and at that time, most of his family had gone to America because they had gone from a very wealthy family to impoverished, and his parents were working as translators. And his sister, Mrs. Takla, was also in America. And so he went to visit them, but he returned to India saying yes, I will take up this responsibility. And, when you think of what was that responsibility, when there's only chaos and there are scattered people, the founder of our lineage, you've heard me say, wrote 150 books. Everyone who came after wrote multiple books, multiple commentaries. The whole Drikung library of the wealth of philosophy and commentary and brilliance had vanished into thin air. And the education system of now we've reestablished the education system, but it starts with 10 years of philosophy, then at least 3 years of retreat. So that had evaporated. The people who were qualified to lead retreats were somewhere as refugees in India. So the idea that he would look at both the suffering of his people, the world that went from being, his responsibilities on the farm to the whole modern world, seeing the boundless suffering of so many different cultures, and having the resolution and confidence to say yes. And so he told the Dalai Lama that he had not broken any of his monastic vows, but he was given full ordination. And one group of monks had found a qualified retreat master in Ladakh. And that retreat master had been working on building roads. So when India gave the Tibetans land, they gave them wilderness. And so all the Tibetan people physically built the roads that were needed in Dharamsala and the places where the refugees were given land and space. And this one Lama had been recognized in the road gang and was petitioned to start offering 3-year retreats again. So His Holiness went into 3-year retreat. And so here we have, first there is the education. There is the need to have the level of spiritual experience to have the spiritual authority. He was in his late 20s. He hadn't had the opportunity for retreat. So the direct understanding that would allow him to offer the wealth of the Drikung lineage and lead is within him as a potential, but until he did the retreat, he had to unlock the potential. And then there's the body of knowledge and the education that would begin to be the seed for the teachers we have now. So he started going all over the world, looking in all the libraries, searching everywhere to find the heritage of the Drikung lineage. And fortunately, there were very wonderful, respected scholars who had been trying during the diaspora of the Tibetan people to find the books and collect the books so that all of Tibetan culture wasn't lost. And he described even going to libraries in Russia and seeing rats running over the books in the stacks. So he's gathering the knowledge, and he gets a small amount of land in Dehradun. One European donor gave him a very small amount of money. I think it was only $10,000. And so there was a big plot of land with one tiny house. And the house was, a very simple house, cement with, 4 or 5 rooms, a kitchen, and a class of I don't know how many students, a small group of very, very young children. And when I was with Venerable Galtsen over in India this past summer, Venerable Galtsen was in that group of first students. And he was saying that, they didn't have very much food and nothing was there. And so they would have some sort of class in the morning. He started 8, 10, 12 years old. I think it was more like 8. And then together they would build the roads to the main road in Dehradun from this little house. So they actually started building in the afternoons the basic infrastructure. And then His Holiness traveled and taught and gathered more funds to build the first monastery college. And he decided he wasn't going to make a regular monastery, that he was going to make a college, and that when the monks finished their education, they had to go out and teach. And the very first class, those children who were in that first house, 1 or 2 became the first teachers at the college. Galtsen was a buildings and grounds and helped learn construction and construction management. So he had that kind of life and future. One of the other monks he sent for higher education, and I believe one of the other monks he sent for some sort of medical education. So he saw this tiny group of people and gave them different directions that set in the potential of the Drikung lineage to then recreate the full education. As soon as they could start to recreate the full education, then he also acquired a retreat center. So there was the traditional 3-year retreat starting that would allow this early group of the second wave of students to become the Drupans and Rinpoches we have today. He also built housing for nuns, and after the retreat center was completed, then he began developing the education of the nuns so that now they also have the full education. And the nuns had some retreat cabins. And at the same time, he was traveling worldwide because there was such suffering in the world and such requests for the teachings that he simply never stopped acting. And once the education and retreat system was set into motion, then he built the library, the huge library, and the university, so that there was further studies past the initial 11 years of philosophy. So the Khenmo and Khenpo studies are beyond the first 10 or 11 years. He began, after that was completed, a focus on the environment. So he could see the plants in Ladakh changing, the animals, the language becoming extinct. He could see how the future was affected by the cultural change and by climate change. And so he decided to devote the next decade of his life to climate change. And one of the interesting things he did was because Tibet was not recognized as an official country, it couldn't participate fully in the UN climate change conferences. So he arranged to be appointed by the UN as a mountain ambassador. And that way he could travel bringing a light of environmental understanding officially, as well as participate in the UN conferences. And it's very much the path of a light unfolding before our very eyes, the path of a bodhisattva's life. And all the seeds have always been there. So I remember the first time I went to India in the 90s, they had just produced an educational book on ecology. And he was just starting the early awareness of teaching his culture to think differently about waste management and how they were running the monastery. And then this developed, along with the education side by side, into a decade focused on climate change with many extraordinary activities and progressive countrywide programs in Ladakh and worldwide programs and collaborations that are still functioning. And then he has announced that in 2025 he's going back into retreat. So you can see how there's a life of extraordinary activity and service, extraordinary leadership, setting up what the future will need from many different perspectives in terms of wisdom, knowledge, and climate awareness, and then an understanding that from the perspective of someone who has this hereditary responsibility life after life, again going into retreat to complete what needs to be completed from the perspective of his mind expanding even more fully into the Dharmakaya. So this is just a way of saying, just to hear his name, just to have the opportunity to go online or to go to any of the events where he may be and be in his person, to make a karmic connection to someone who is so clearly demonstrating selfless bodhisattva activity with every second of their life, is an amazingly rare situation. And I wanted to start out because we in America have so many wonderful teachers and Rinpoches that we can not understand really how extraordinary some of these great spiritual masters are, and that they are human beings. So their life in the relative reality is impermanent, just like our life is. And so the opportunity to make a connection with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with His Holiness Drikung Chetseng Rinpoche, with His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche, we are a drop of water in the whole of humanity that have even heard their names, that have even the aspiration to turn on our computers and be present to take this vow with them, with His Holiness in this case. So all the factors of our life that have become the causes and conditions that we're even considering paying attention to the opportunity to take this vow is an amazing situation. And Deirdre, for someone who's new, how wonderful for you to join us on a day when we're talking about this wonderful person and getting to know him a little bit. So as we're looking forward to that opportunity, we go back to understanding how rare and fortunate all these causes and conditions are, and to really thinking about what opens our heart and what is opening our heart to have interest in this Buddha Dharma that is at the very root about the fullness of loving kindness and compassion that we use the word bodhicitta for. And so there's a quote from the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. For those who are interested in freeing themselves from suffering and want to benefit other sentient beings, bodhicitta is the one thing to hold, to cherish, and actualize. Buddhahood is the perfect mental formation of bodhicitta. So here we have a clear statement about why we're together, why we have been studying all these different texts. It's so that we arouse in our hearts the desire to leave behind our bubble of it's all about me and how I experience the world, to free ourselves from the suffering that causes. And as we understand our own and are able to hold our eyes open and our hearts open to the suffering of the world, to have a sincere aspiration that others are freed from suffering. And that this path that's presented in our tradition, and it is a path of a seed growing into a fully flowering, perfect mental formation of absolute bodhicitta. So how do we fully understand a word that's not even translatable? Bodhicitta is a word that we do not have in English. So we can say, again from the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, on the basis of loving kindness, compassion, and refuge, we begin cultivating bodhicitta. So all the years of study and practice that we've been doing together have been mostly at the relative reality. There is an I, there is a suffering beings, and we are training ourselves to first have an aspiration not to add to the suffering of the world, not to increase our own suffering. This intention leads to cultivating our studies. And over time, we begin to see that, yes, every philosophical tradition emphasizes loving kindness and compassion. And we want to understand that to the fullest. And from the perspective of Buddhism, this includes the first level of commitment, which is refuge, seeing that we are confused, that we are searching for happiness in a very exterior way. And when we sit in meditation and connect to the loving kindness trainings and the compassion trainings, we experience a deep peace. And these trainings come from the words of the Buddha, but they also come from the realization that the Buddha had. And from our perspective, this growing realization is not something that's outside, that happened only historically. It is a knowing, and that knowing is inherently inside as well. That each and every mind has the potential for that realization, that we have the potential for that realization. And it's a matter of clearing away the confusion. So we're entering a philosophical tradition that has a history of many great beings having this realization, but it's based on the foundation that each and every being with mind is capable of that same realization, that we have the fundamental Buddha nature. And that our practice and study is to clear away the confusion that covers that Buddha nature. And we begin to understand that it's reliable. The deeper we go into our studies, the deeper we practice, we have growing confidence in what we're learning, the growing confidence in the texts that have been so carefully kept in a pristine way that they are medicine in which no impurities have entered, and that we're not only in one Tibetan lineage, but we're part of a greater history of many beings who have relied on this medicine and become Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or have in their own lives, in relative reality, had that realization or that perfect mental formation of bodhicitta. And we have wonderful teachers living today who demonstrate to us that without anyone needing to give them acclaim or recognition, we see by their every thought, word, and action what that selfless, perfect mental formation of bodhicitta looks like. So we can say that all of the practices and studies that we've done lead us to having confidence in this particular path, lead us to having confidence in our own Buddha nature. And one way to assess that confidence is just, how we have studied together and how each and every one of us has changed by studying together and practicing together. So we have learned about kindness and compassion And we have seen in our own experience, imperfect as we are different than before we heard the Dharma. We are holding our aspiration to not add to the suffering of the world, to be mindful of our actions, to open more, a little every day, to the suffering of others. And when we really keep in mind the path quality of this, that it is micro movements of our mind. We were talking a lot in the Tai Chi class about micro movements. It's just soft little changes in our minds that we actually have reliable new habits of at least being aware of our lack of patience or various addictions, and that there is a little more spaciousness in our minds to make different choices. So all of those tiny changes allow us to have confidence in this particular direction. And the times when we have been able to sit with an open heart of compassion and understand that at that moment we are actually not suffering. We see how it brings peace to ourselves, and with our slowly changing habits, peace to others. So at a certain point, as practitioners, we become ready to make firmer and firmer commitments. We're actually taking the Bodhisattva in our opening, the Bodhisattva Vow in our opening prayers. The Bodhisattva Vow is something that we can do multiple times a day as an aspiration. Repeat it over and over again. We can do it intentionally visualizing the Buddha in front of us, or we can do it in a formal ceremony. And what's coming up in February is the opportunity to do it in a formal ceremony. So it's a level of being firm in our confidence and resolved in the direction of our lives to train. The Bodhisattva Vow at the beginning is simply, I see that the Dharma is changing my life and I want to refrain from adding suffering into the world. I want to have a heart of loving kindness and compassion. So I make the commitment to enter into training absolutely without hesitation and with confidence, without doubt. Or I'm going to put my toe in the water and I'm going to make a connection to the Drikung lineage, to this extraordinary person, His Holiness Drikung Chetseng Rinpoche. And even by listening to him and being open to his bodhicitta heart, I'm going to see if I can make a stronger aspiration to this path for my life. So at the same time, it's a gift to you for wherever you are in your understanding, in your practice, and a delight to take over and over and over again, reaffirming your aspiration and allowing your aspiration, like a flower blooming, to, over time, become this firm resolve, this unhesitating commitment. And again, the example of a flower is always so wonderful, because the flower, if we create fertile soil, an open mind, if we create water and sunshine, loving kindness and compassion, then the flower blooms by itself. So we're putting all of these conditions together to bring both peace to our own hearts and minds, but also to all our circles of relationships and all those beings distant from us that we are opening to as we become aware of the interconnected quality of life on earth. So the next 2 Sundays, I'm going to go into more detail about the evolution of the flower growing, the Bodhisattva path, and what that training is like, and how we can engage fully, all the while understanding what might be damaging to the training. But the first quality of taking the Bodhisattva vow in a formal ceremony is to have a qualified spiritual master whose bodhicitta mind is never undamaged. Someone who has perfected that mind and has no quality of the slightest obscuration covering their bodhicitta. And that is so rare in the world that encountering, even online, His Holiness Drikung Khyabgyon Chetsang Rinpoche, without you knowing it, all your actions through many lifetimes have opened the potential for this upcoming ceremony. And it's so easy now. It's just Zoom. You only have to turn on your computer. So why don't we dedicate quickly and end the live transmission, and then we'll have questions and answers and discussion. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. And we'll dedicate